Great. We did it.
Yeah,
We beat
honestly.
Andy's apple farm without a minute to spare.
Wow.
I mean, that I feel like it was so appropriate to my level of video game play, which is none. And
you know your way around a haunted
You-
house.
You did great. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you ever
That was
been to like an old creepy building that houses like an apple farm though? Like, have you ever been to like spooky?
like
oh
real
yeah,
talk.
Yeah.
It's like creepy,
totally.
like barn
I mean,
on site.
creepy barns are just par for the course. That's like expected. You got to be ready for the creepy barn experience. The most important field work, I would say, preparation for this kind of field work is appropriate footwear.
Ooh.
Mm.
Talk
Honestly,
a little, you talking boots or talk a little about
underrated advice.
that is very true.
Underrated advice.
Because I mean, if you're gonna go into the creepy-tastic, spooky barn, you don't want to step on a nail. It gets ugly pretty fast, as the video game showed us.
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh,
I mean, I think the like reality of farming is that it's pretty brutal. I mean, that's where all that stuff comes from.
Sure. Chad is asking about a
Yeah.
legend that one of them has heard about not tearing down a dilapidated barn, that you have to leave it up even if it looks bad because it's bad luck.
No, I don't know about that, but that's interesting.
Yeah. This game has dilapidated barn that we're letting stand energy.
Yeah.
Definitely.
You definitely made me think differently. I mean, even though this this game is not necessarily about apple orchard, maybe it is. I had never thought about the family history that's tied up in the growth of the woodland or the orchard around it, and how the farming there actually can lead to lots of, not always intergenerational traumas, but
Hardship,
just like hardship and being a family and being a farmer, and like how difficult
falling
it is.
Off a boat that came up.
Yeah, like falling off the boat, but also in a less like silly way, like the very real lived experience of like the community embedded in the land, and in particular that kind of occupation. I don't know. I was thinking, make me think already. This is why we got you on the show.
They love thinking. Yeah.
I think what lends itself to this kind of haunting thing is that we have these like two sort of ideas about, there's like an agrarian kind of idyllic fantasy of the countryside, and then there's the like brutal reality of the hardships of doing manual labor and working on and there's a lot of intergenerational trauma in farming, especially. So my research doesn't deal with that so much, but is there.
It's just something
while you were
watching Andy's apple farm.
Oh, I meant in the field, but or watching Andy's apple farm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's get into great talk and great tying together the game and the interview we're about to do. Way to put a bow on that, Maria. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We're about to formally start the interview, and I think I want to let Daisy do this next part.
Friends, chatters, Maria,
voting members of the Academy,
folklorists, people who may be watching and don't know what we're doing here. You might see me and or Dom on the show a lot. You see our faces, you hear our voices. Some people call me the disembodied voice of God. Totally not taking that to heart in any way. But what you don't always see is our team of interview sleuths who help us come up with the questions that we ask our guests every week. These sleuths are, I don't know, tech savvy, detail oriented. They are great at taking my dream brain and turning it into something that is consumable by the mass audiences. They're just wonderful team who helps us come up with all the research that we have for our guests every week that aren't always necessarily me and or Dom. So if you hear a question that you think is funny, that you were thinking yourself and was hoping somebody would ask, or if Maria laughs or is like, wow, I never thought of it that way, whatever, all those things, do not thank me and Dom, thank the interview sleuthing team.
Thanks for that, Daisy, and thanks in advance, sleuths. And of course, chat, if you've got a question you want to ask Maria, type it in chat and Daisy will read it, or email us if it's a little wordy. Email us at folkwise13@gmail.com,
Yeah.
and we will ask Maria while we've got her on the show. So Maria, you want to get started with your interview?
I'm ready.
Let's get right to it, Maria. Okay,
Go for it.
We're gonna start off big, like we like to do around here.
Whoa.
How has the conservation of orchards and the revival of craft cider making created opportunities to maintain rural identity?
Whoa. That's like throwing the whole ship at me at once.
The sleuths did that.
And my what I would say is that that's like my whole thesis, and I got to break it down now.
Please, we would want nothing more than for you to help us break it down into little chunks that make up the bigger piece, or whatever.
The folks at home too.
Yeah.
So maybe an easier way to start is to talk about like why I got interested in this stuff in the first place. Is that a good
way to do it?
Is that a good place to start?
Yeah.
So, I was a drifter, an English major. And and after 4 years of reading about England and Britain, I was like, I want to go see this place, darn it. So I couldn't afford to do like just travel for travel's sake. So I went woofing. Do you guys know what woofing is? Worldwide opportunities on organic farms. It's a farm exchange.
Wow.
That's cool.
And someone suggested this to me. They thought I'd like it. And so I was like, okay. And this was back like, in 2004. And so I had to actually like write to the organization, and they sent me a paper catalog with the names of all the participating farmers.
Wow.
That's awesome.
And I was doing this in the UK, obviously. And so I booked my first farm stay, which was in Wales. And I emailed the farm and I was like, hey, I'm thinking of coming at this time. Do you need a volunteer? So it was like, you don't earn money. You just work for room and board.
Right. It's something I've heard a lot with people who are just like traveling around as a reason to continue traveling to new places. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, that's pretty much why I was doing it. And I saved up a bunch of money, to pay for my plane ticket and my own sort of travel in between places. But yeah, and I got off the plane in London and I went to see a friend in Cambridge, and I booked a bus ticket to a town I couldn't even pronounce, called Llanidloes in mid Wales. And I got on the bus and I got off the bus and I was looking for a guy named Kevin. And Kevin was going to be there to meet me. This is all like, I didn't have a phone. Like I did not have a cell phone, at that time. And so I got off the bus and there's this guy named Kevin with like long hair and ponytail. And he's like, yeah, I'm Kevin. And I'm going to take you like 4 miles up the mountain to where our farm is. And I was like, okay. So that was the beginning of my agricultural adventure. And I did that for the rest of the summer in 2004. And then I just like fell in love with the English countryside, the British countryside. And I was just so fascinated by the way people in Britain had this very complex relationship with the structures of their countryside, the stone walls, the orchards, the hedgerows. Like all of these structures were so intimately a part of their experience of rural life. And they also, I came to understand over time, in addition to having these like cultural heritage and agricultural, purposes, functional purposes on the farm, they also have become part of a way of thinking about conservation in Britain. Because if you think about Britain, it's a place that's been continuously developed and farmed and occupied by humans, for the last 5,000 years. And there's not a lot of wilderness there. So when we think of doing conservation in the United States, we have this idea of wilderness. And we think about Yellowstone, and we think about state parks, and we think about all these places where we're sort of supposed to have minimal human intervention. And there's not a whole lot of places like that in Britain. So if you're asking the question, how do I do conservation in a place that doesn't really have wilderness? The answer to that question is that you have to work with the landscape that you have, and the landscape that they have is the rural countryside, which is by and large farmed. So you have to do conservation in agricultural spaces. And it becomes this question of like using these very traditional heritage structures as the place where you do conservation. So there are conservation subsidies to maintain hedgerows and to maintain meadows, wildflower meadows, to encourage biodiversity. And there are subsidies for orchards. And orchards, when I was over there to do my dissertation research, I discovered all of these like orchard heritage and orchard biodiversity projects. And that I was like, oh, that's really cool. And that's how it became my dissertation research. And now that I'm focused both in the UK and in the US, I'm kind of like looking at the different ways that people use this particular agricultural landscape, the orchard, for all of these different purposes, for an economic purpose, for maintaining a business, for growing a local economy, for conservation, for wildlife management, for pleasure, and for social and cultural space. So I became really interested in the orchard in particular, just because it's a very resonant and really culturally, like as we just saw with Andy's apple orchard, right? It's a space that has a lot of meaning, and that meaning gets tied up in a lot of our oldest stories, like Adam and Eve. And so there's just a lot of ways that people interact with it on a very affective, like feeling, personal, but also social and cultural level. And that gets mapped onto all these other purposes as well. So that's why I find orchards really interesting.
Yeah.
And then I just happened to be in orchards and people were making cider there. And I was like, oh, this is a thing. And so I worked for a cider maker in Britain during my fieldwork, which was super fun. Not gonna lie, no regrets. And yeah, and then now I'm back in the States, and I'm working on a project that's looking at the use of wild fruit, so fruit from apple trees that are not in cultivated orchards but are like out in the forest. There's like a sort of very niche subset of cider makers who are using wild fruit, but there are some interesting reasons why they're doing that. So that's like my intro. Does that answer your fundamental question?
Yeah, I think it answers. I think it answers a lot, and I do want to get into like the wild fruit of it all. But I think the only thing I would follow up with was it would be is there something inherent about the link between like craft cider and this like sort of rural identity, either in Britain or in the States?
Yeah, that's like so once I sort of came to the whole thing through the environmental, ecological, agricultural lens. And then once I got into the cider making, there's like a whole other part of your, Andy's apple orchard maze to explore. And that is in there are two very different things that share some similarities. In Britain, cider making is a part of this agricultural practice that was just a big part of, of farming in general. If you were a farmer, you would make a lot of cider, just for the consumption of your household or your neighbors. There were areas of Britain that were much more like commercially oriented that made cider for export and commercial purposes. And there's this whole just sort of culture of sitting around the cellar with your mates having a pint of cider. And that is very rooted in a particularly, I would say, gendered experience of agriculture in Britain. It's a lot about guys. They're like sitting around the cider cellar and sitting around a barrel, and that's changing, of course, now. But that's definitely a thing in Britain, and here in the United States, cider was a big part of the agrarian history of early colonial America. And that saw like a downswing in the 19th century. A lot of people like to attribute that to prohibition, being like the nail in the coffin of cider. But it really has more to do, I think, with the changes of the economy, from an agrarian economy of early colonial America to an industrial economy.
Oh, sure.
And beer operates in an industrial economy much easier. And so in America now we're in this moment of this like huge cider revival. So when I came back from my research in Britain, I came back from my fieldwork in 2013. I literally got off the plane at Chicago O'Hare, took a bus down to Indianapolis, which is where my parents live. And I got back on a bus a week later to go back up to Chicago to go to the first big CiderCon, which is the industry conference for the cider industry. And it happens in February every year. And so I went to the first, there had been several before, but the first big one was in 2013. So when I went to Britain to do my research, like cider was barely, I mean, there was woodchuck and whatnot, but it was barely a thing. And then when I came back, like Angry Orchard had become a product.
Yeah.
And we've got Angry Orchard in my fridge right now.
You should have one.
Yeah. Right. I know. I should have one.
Yeah. So there's just this whole like resurgence of craft cider as being a product. I'm sure many of you folks on the chat have probably had a cider or gone to a cidery. It's like a thing that exists now, and it did not exist when I went to do my research in Britain. And that the very like rapid rise of this industry is interesting in and of itself in the United States, and the kinds of people and markets that it is responding to. Whereas Britain is super traditional and is just now sort of becoming innovative and thinking about cider as a product and having an audience, a sector that can be innovative. They look to America and see these Americans just doing whatever the hell they want. They're like, tradition? We don't care about that. We're going to make a whole new product that has like hops and like, blah, just all of these. It's kind of like Wild West over here. And I think Britons see that as being like enviable. Whereas Americans sometimes, I think, envy the Brits for their sense of like ingrained history and tradition.
Yeah.
That's so fascinating.
Sure. I have, geez, at some point I'll move on to a second question, but I can ask endless follow-ups.
Just keep talking. Just keep.
Yeah,
just
keep going. Oh my God, so much more I want to ask. The way I have this written in the document, Maria, is
you have to read it as it's written.
Okay, I'm gonna here. I'll spruce it up a little bit, Daisy. Only you will know.
Okay.
But
okay,
Maria, Ciderland, is that a place like Bruce Springsteen's Jungle Land, or is that an imaginary like Guy Fieri's Flavortown?
Okay, don't know either of those references, but
I thought the Bruce Springsteen one for Rutgers.
I'm remiss. I'm remiss on. I don't know all my Bruce Springsteen references, but I'm getting there. I'm trying Jersey. I'm trying really hard. Anyway,
that's the Rutgers neighborhood in. Where's he from? Freehold.
I don't know. You looking at us? We don't know.
Free something. What town?
Probably Freehold.
Freehold. Yeah,
Freehold.
That's a
Freehold sounds good.
Freehold, Maria. Anyway.
Ciderland. I mean, it's an imaginary, and it is also, I would say, a real place. I mean, there's no place called Ciderland, like officially.
Sure.
But so I took the name Ciderland. Actually, I'll show you just a minute. Let me grab a book.
Yes.
Oh,
we love books.
we love a prop.
Hell yeah.
Chad, if you got more questions, also
Okay, I'm coming back.
Send them right
my
in.
my bookshelf is like right next door.
Oh, great. She's back.
So I took the term Ciderland from this book.
Yay.
Oh,
whoa, look at that. Wow, out at first glance, or like with the fuzziness of the screen, I did think cranberry bog, it's frog bog, it's fall. Okay, sorry. Those are a bunch of apples.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so
Deathlorse has already put it in the chat. Thank you. Thank you,
my
brave
God.
little mom.
Oh. So this is a fantastic book. I bought this book like in one of the first weeks of when I was doing my field research in Britain. I saw it in a bookstore, and I was like, "Oh my God, this has all the answers."
Yeah.
And it's mainly like profiles of cider makers in different regions in Britain.
How did you find the guide to your field work? Because I hope to find that. That's so cool. You found a book that has like some profiles of people you could theoretically contact to like talk about cider with. That's so cool.
I will say that I'll go back actually to I found this when I was there and doing my field research, which was in 2011 to 2013. But when I was in Britain for the first time, when I was doing my woofing, my adventure, I found this book by the same author.
Oh.
Cider, the Forgotten Miracle.
Whoa, is that Adam and Eve too?
Totally Adam and Eve.
Oh my God.
And I found this book, so I was at another farm in Devon, which is a county in southwestern England. And they had an old orchard, and they had an old barn, and in the barn was this huge old wooden press, and there was a barrel with some like really vinegary cider. And this book was sitting on the coffee table, and I picked it up, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is the coolest book ever!" And I remember I wrote it down in my journal. I like copied out these like paragraphs from this book, and it was describing wassail. I'm trying to see if I can find. Here's a good one. When you peer into a cider house, by that I mean the barn where the cider is made and sold, you peer into half darkness that is not just medieval, it is primeval.
Ooh.
It has the sanctity of the cave, the air of mystery of a chapel or crypt. It has the smell and atmosphere of oak, apples, and tannin, a headiness, a fermented symphony of subtle tastes and odors, a kind of democracy that predates the feudal age, where even the poorest pensioner is treated as a valued customer. I mean, this stuff, like this book was so, like, the language is so hyperbolic and just so, it's just out of this other kind of reality. And so I read this book and I was like, oh my God, I have to know more about this thing. And then, so that was 2004 to 2011. So that's like 7 years until I find the next book, which is Ciderland by the same guy. And this is a much more sort of like regular person book. Like, this is a crazy person book. And this is a regular person book.
All right, so I'm going book number 1.
Yeah, so I'm going book number 1. Yeah, Chad is just saying that this is some poetry.
Really is.
But so I found this book, but the title, Ciderland, and he does talk about this in some depth, his own theory of Ciderland. So I'm really just riffing on what he says and then take it at a sort of more like, well, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to have this idea of this? It's an idea of a region. There's a region of Southwest and Western England that is like the cider producing region, but it's also this state of mind. It's this like idea of what does it mean to live an agricultural or a rural life. And it's a place, and I think all cider makers would probably agree with me, or at least most of them, Ciderland is a crazy person place. It is like you have to have a little bit of this kind of, like a twinkle in your eye, like light of the moon, like kind of romance.
This is going on
Or
in the
else
in the cover, yeah.
yeah, or else like why would you do this thing? Like I think the whole endeavor just sort of requires you to take a risk. And actually one time I asked an apple farmer who was a very regular guy here in New York. I was like, what is it about apples? Like, why do you want to grow apples instead of like soybeans or corn or whatever? Some other commodity crap you could like know you're going to make money off of. And he told me this and I've never forgotten it and I quote it all the time. He's like, if you're going to grow apples, you have to gamble. You have to like risk. Like you because apples, unlike soybeans or corn, they're very delicate, especially when they're going from blossom to fruit. Like that transition is the most vulnerable part of the year. And that's when there's the most anxiety because it's like if the blossoms get frosted, if there's bad weather, like you could lose the whole crop. And that kind of risk is kind of like it's what makes a gambler a gambler. You're kind of like living for it. You're like, is it going to be good this year? I think it's going to be good. And that kind of risk sort of has this romance to it too. You've got this, you're like, I'm willing to risk it all for the light of the moon, and
absolutely.
Oh yeah.
The chat is just popping off about that. Suburban Chick says average beer fan versus average cider enjoyer.
I can only imagine the Giga Chad cider enjoyer on the right of that diagram. Yeah.
I've gambled so many times.
Well, speaking about things that are wild, Maria, I'd like to talk a little bit about your current work with Wild Apples. Can you talk a little bit about the dynamics between like industrialized food systems versus foraging that come up in your current work?
Oh my goodness. So, I've got more books here. I've got my little pile of books.
Oh, awesome! Love this.
Awesome.
Chat, we're gonna keep getting links. We're gonna put links in the chat for those.
What is the contender for props for our Wising Awards?
Here is a book called Uncultivated by Andy Brennan. Andy Brennan.
Andy's Apple Farm. Okay.
Andy's Apple Farm.
Full circle.
And Andy Brennan is Andy Brennan owns the cider company Aaron Burr Cidery, which is based in north of New York in the Catskills.
I would say somewhere north of New York City, I would assume.
And actually it's called Aaron Burr because Aaron Burr was the lawyer who had some sort of legal like signing the deed or something for the original farmstead. Like there was some historical relationship. Anyway, and so Andy Brennan wrote this book called Uncultivated, and he's kind of the guy who really had the poetry and the PR savvy and the storytelling ability to kind of make the use of wild fruit in making cider a thing. People have done this, on a vernacular level for ages. There's an apple tree on your property. You go and you pick the fruit. Maybe you make cider from it. I mean, there's nothing particularly new about this. But and even did I bring the other book? Oh, I have so many. Here's another book. Of course, good old Johnny Appleseed sort of like set the stage for all of this in America because he was going out and planting apple seeds. Now, when you plant an apple seed, you are not going to get the same kind of apple that you plant it from. That's like a basic biological fact. And so in order to propagate, like if you want a gala apple, you have to take a cutting of a gala and you have to graft it and propagate it asexually. So if you take a seed, you're going to get a totally different fruit. And that's what Johnny Appleseed was doing. And so essentially he was planting wild seedlings. Uncultivated seedlings. And so people are making cider from this kind of fruit like throughout early America. But what Andy Brennan did is he sort of made a philosophy about it. He was like, I'm going to use uncultivated fruit because essentially it's an argument about terroir. It's about getting the sense of the place, of the relationship of the apple to the tree and the tree to the soil that it's in, and the uniqueness of that individual tree as opposed to that gala that just gets reproduced, into a whole orchard of galas.
Yeah.
If you've got one tree that's completely unique, not only in its genetic makeup, but in its place on the earth, in a little crag of a rock, like jutting out of the Catskills, then that's like an artistic kind of relationship with the understanding of that product, that plant. And that's, I think Andy was just really into that. And so he went foraging through the Catskills and finding particular trees that were really good, that had really interesting apples, and then making cider from it. And he was also he's from New York. He was a New Yorker. He's an artist. He knew how to tell a story. And he basically got like the New York foodie world really excited about that story of wild fruit and the kind of terroir that it could have. And cider being, and coming out of the woodchuck kind of place that it was, trying to make cider something that you could imagine and experience as having terroir was like a real elevation of this particular beverage to a different kind of echelon, alongside wine. So he kind of made that whole thing happen, and then it sort of spread out to other cider makers. And so I started this project with my colleague Greg Peck, who's a plant scientist at Cornell, to actually go out and ask people, why are you foraging? What are you looking for? Like, what qualities of apple are you selecting for? And then, what do you plan to do with it? Like, are you making cider? Some people they just want to make cider from foraged fruit, like Andy Brennan, just like, for their terroir reasons. Other people are interested actually in some more ecological questions, like, can we find locally adapted trees? So if they've survived on their own out there in the forest, without the application of pesticides and herbicides and fungicides, maybe that means they're going to be really hardy and they're going to work in this climate without as much intervention. And that would be great for agriculture for a whole host of reasons. And some people are interested in doing that for themselves. Some people are interested in doing that for the sort of industry as a whole, for the building of more sort of localized agricultural communities. So we're interested in just trying to understand that because it's something that's really poorly understood. And we see this study as being able to kind of like, by looking at this practice, which is very marginal and very niche, it kind of gives us a sideways glance at the industry as a whole. So that we can ask some critical questions about like, what is the direction of the genetic diversity of apple growing in agriculture? How are people mitigating risk in this highly vulnerable crop? How are they imagining economic futures for small communities and rural communities by doing this thing, which is essentially not really a money-making enterprise, but imagines an importance for this product that can kind of help elevate a business in other ways. So there's all kinds of like sideways questions that we can sort of ask about apple, the small farming in general, the apple industry in particular, and cider most particularly, by looking at this very marginal and niche practice. There's my elevator pitch.
Great answer.
Great
elevator pitch. I'm sold.
Hope you like it.
I did.
I'm like, that was good.
And Maria, speaking of sideways questions, I wanna follow up on, you were talking about Greg Peck at Cornell, which, by the way, we tried to Google him and it only came up the actor Gregory Peck. However,
that's the only person.
So you're a visiting.
Oh my gosh.
You're a visiting scientist at Cornell. So what is it like being a certain kind of nerd for apples and working with
Oh my
Very
gosh.
different but similar. Nerds for apples.
So I'm just gonna say, first of all, it totally tickles me to be a visiting scientist as a
Right?
folklorist.
Right?
Um, and I got to spend my my semester being part of Greg's lab group. And I've got to say, I've always been like, I always in grad school wanted us to have this kind of learning experience. Like,
Mm.
I would always ask our professors at IU, like, I know that Warren Roberts used to take groups of students out into the field and do like group, you know, field work. Like, why don't we do that anymore? Like, why is that not a thing? It's a thing in the sciences, like the lab as an intellectual institution for, apprenticing and learning how
Mm-hmm.
to do science is a real thing. And we could do that too in the humanities and the social sciences. We just choose not to. We choose to um, conduct our intellectual lives in ways that privilege the monograph, that
Yeah.
privilege the single author, that privilege me going out to do my fieldwork by myself with
Yeah.
my constituency. And it doesn't have to be that way. And so I really, really liked seeing and interacting with my colleagues' lab group. And I really want to bring that back into the humanities and social sciences because I think that we used to do that and it just became an intellectual fashion to not do that anymore. So that's one answer to your question. But in terms of being like an Apple nerd with other Apple nerds, I have to say it's very humbling because the science Apple nerds are like, I don't understand what they're saying half the time. But it was I got to do work in the lab, not like with lab, you know, special fancy equipment, but
Mm-hmm.
like, I helped process the apples as they were coming. So we bring apple samples in and I'd help our lab tech process them. And I made some mistakes and, I felt dumb. And I was like, I have a PhD, but I'm not doing this as well as your grad student. So
Different worlds, different worlds.
yeah. But it was great. It was a great learning experience. And then my colleague Greg, we were sitting down with our work study students, undergrads who worked with us all semester, and he was like, I've been having them transcribe using a voice to text transcription service
Mm-hmm.
the interviews I've been doing. And he's like, so can you explain to the students who are plant science students, like, how does it get from this to like, a research article? Like, and I was like, okay, I'm going to explain qualitative research methods in 10 minutes.
Hell
Go.
yeah. Good luck.
That's awesome.
But it was actually a really great challenge for me because it forced me. We have so many assumptions that we just all carry around, in our field. And I was like, okay, I have to explain how words are the research object here. Like, this is the data. I have to be able to translate what the idea of data is between science and humanities. And I don't think that's something we ask ourselves to do very much.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually a lot of continuities that we can draw between those ways of talking.
Joel Chappening in the chat said, I see photos of folklorists in the field all the time from the 70s and 80s. And he's like, why don't we do that more? In reference specifically to like a supplement to classroom learning. Like, why are folklorists and scientists hanging out in the classroom? Like, where is the interdisciplinary like insights? Clearly, if you have to explain qualitative research in 10 minutes, to a room full of scientists, like that's important.
I know when I was John Kay's GA, he was teaching Indiana folklore as like a summer class, and one class, like one session a term, he would just take his kids to the cemetery and just like cut them loose. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's no reason why that can't be part of our pedagogy.
Oh yeah.
And
I'm
there
with you.
it so I'm really stoked to like challenge myself to bring that back to, my own situation here at Rutgers where I'm not in a folklore department. I'm in an American Studies department, and most of the students I get are business and pre-med or nursing, and they
Phone elective.
you know,
Yeah.
and I love teaching teaching that constituency, but it's like we could be learning more from each other, and we could be doing it in an interactive, immersive way that actually engages students in the research process with you, instead of just like sending them off to do their own thing and you go off and do your thing. And it's all very lonely. We don't need to be this lonely, my friends. We could be doing research together.
I'll sign off on that.
That's like the whole folklorist thing. The community is stronger together, right? Like that's like the whole thing. Yeah. That's awesome.
I feel like at this juncture, I need to pour myself a glass. I've been feeling so like
we gotta give you a moment to do this. Yeah.
Open that thing up, and I'll get ready to ask you our last
Another
serious question before we move into the fun stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it does have to do with kind of Rutgers adjacent. But it's more New Jersey Folk Festival. Which you work on. New directions in New Jersey for New Jersey folk. What are some of these new directions for New Jersey folk, and what's it like steering something that's been around for 50 years into something new, something now?
Well, it's good that I'm pouring the cider right now for this question.
Perfect. Oh wait. Oh my gosh. Wait.
So let me show you what it is.
Yeah, I was like, before you answer the question, please explain.
Oh yeah.
This is a cider by my friend Steve Seelan from South Hill Cider. It's called Russet Dabinet, and those are two apple variety. Well, russets are sort of whole category of apples, but it's probably golden russet is what he means by that. And Dabinet is a cider variety from England and France.
Nice.
So I'm going to pour myself a little here.
In your specific cider glass.
So actually, this cider glass is very specific because
oh my gosh, okay.
So when I was working as the folklorist for the Arts Council of the Southern Finger Lakes, for those of you who don't know, Corning, New York, which is where my office was, Corning Glass. There's a whole glass museum, and there's lots of glass artists, and then there are all these cider makers, and I was like, we should bring them together. See, more collaboration. It's all about collaboration. Bring the glass artists and the cider makers together. So I paired up some glass artists and cider makers, and they came up with unique designs. And this was one of them. So handmade glass.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
Anyway,
the chat is popping off for the homemade, handmade glassware moment. It's very good. That's awesome.
But yeah, okay. So New Jersey Folk Festival, New Directions in Folk.
New Directions
what
in
it's
Folk.
What it's like to take on a long-standing project. Okay. So New Directions in Folk it's kind of like a little sub-theme of the festival. So the festival is based on the Smithsonian model, so it had a cultural theme for a different cultural group every year, or occupational group. I think in the age that we're in, we're moving towards having themes for the festival that are less about featuring one cultural, ethnic, occupational group, and being something that can draw in people from a lot of different cultural experiences. I think that there's a lot of good reasons to kind of shift gears in that direction. One of them being that focusing on a particular cultural group has its pros and cons. I think that from my perspective as a folklorist, it's difficult, especially, being a director of one for a folk festival, to take on the curatorial task of representing a particular cultural group in all of its depth and complexity, and essentially being not an expert in that on a yearly basis. So I think there are other ways that we can be representative of the multicultural society that we live in New Jersey. And so we're trying to look for those other themes that can draw in people from lots of different experiences and still allow us to feature the cultural diversity and depth of the state. So New Directions in Folk kind of comes out of that, but also because as part of the festival, we used to have a particular stage devoted to singer-songwriters. And in the course of COVID, of course, we had to change everything. And we've downsized, so we only have one stage now. So we were like, how do we continue to recognize this artistic genre that has been a part of the festival for so long? How do we try to draw in more different kinds of musicians and think about folk music, because that singer-songwriter sort of section of our audience and musician artist constituency, it was really white. It was really white and really male, and it was like there's a lot more going on in folk music about the history of social justice and the relationship to folk music. Folk music as sort of the bridge between traditional genres and traditional groups and popular music. Folk music as a site where innovation and avant-garde can happen in conversation with the traditional genres and groups. And so this New Directions in Folk theme is kind of like an opportunity for us to be a little bit more interesting and complex while still thinking about singer-songwriter contemporary music as part of our artistic direction. So we kind of started working on that by first during the pandemic in an online venue, doing a panel on Paul Robeson, who was very involved, or is it one of the most? He was one of the first. He was the first African American to graduate from Rutgers, and also like amazing folk musician and very involved in social justice issues. So we started with that as kind of a jumping off point, and we've done some little concerts, featuring artists who are performing in some of those different zones that I just described. And so this year we were like, okay, let's bring it to the main stage. Let's have that be what we're featuring on the main stage. So that's what we're doing. Questions about that before I go to the what it's like to run an event that has a legacy?
You are speaking my language. I am sitting here relating all that to Florida, and it makes perfect sense. I think you did a great job explaining it. Unless Daisy's got a question, I think you can go right ahead.
I don't think I have a question, but just to I don't know, reiterate for longevity's sake, you're describing some of the this is what folklorists do, and when people think of folklore, if they're not thinking of, I don't know, wizards and fairies or dancing or music, they're thinking of festivals or places where they may have seen a folk culture, traditional, or big air quotes on that for people because I'm just the disembodied voice right now. But I think it's interesting to hear the different ways that folklorists are addressing those kind of issues and taking their role as serious in shaping what those spaces look like. So I don't know. Continue. I like hearing this. I think it's very, very cool. Yeah.
Well, the other part of your question was taking on an event with such longevity. So when I came to the New Jersey Folk Festival, it was in its 45th year. And had been run by the same person, Angus Cress Gillespie, who founded it in 1975. And Angus is still an active working member of our American Studies department. He's no longer directly involved in the festival. And I think that the key word here is leadership transition is hard.
Oh, boy.
And,
oh boy.
Even when everybody involved is trying their best, and there's a lot of people involved in an event like this. And I'm literally younger than the festival. Angus had run that festival. I had not even been born when he founded the festival.
Damn.
So to hand it over to somebody, who as young as me, and I say that saying that I was in my late 30s when I took it over. So it's not like I was fresh-nosed whippersnapper or anything. I've been out in the world. I worked. I have professional experience. But, you know, many of the people who worked with Angus looked up to him as a father figure. And when they encountered me, you know, saw me very much as like a child, their child.
Oh boy.
And that was hard. So there's a lot of age dynamics going on there. There's gender dynamics, and I would say that this is an issue that our field faces a lot, all the time. But especially right now, is sort of this grand generation of people who came up around the bicentennial. In public folklore are retiring and handing things over. And I think that I'm still dealing. I mean, I'm in my 5th year now at Rutgers and with the festival. And there are, you know, big, hard decisions about the future to be dealt with. I'm going to say it right here. I don't know if we will be doing a festival forever. I don't know whether it's the right format for the types of cultural issues and social realities and financial realities and institutional realities that we have to deal with right now. We're still doing it, but I think it's wise to keep an open mind about change.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that it's hard, I'm not going to lie. And you have to be willing to be really gracious about the past, but also willing to sort of like stake your ground and say what you think the future should look like too. And I'm not always great at that. It's daunting. It's very daunting. And also, I have particular views about the nature of work-life balance, which I think are more representative of I'm sort of the tail end of the Gen Xers, I'm in that bridge, the Oregon Trail generation, to make a game game reference. And so, but I think I'm part of this generation that's really unwilling to take on the work-life balance sort of compact that was made by some of our predecessors in the field, where it was like, give everything you've got to the cause, you know, eat, sleep, work, drink, think, breathe, you know, dream, folklore 24/7. And I think that I've made it a mission to really prioritize workable, you know, we should all be putting in a reasonable amount of time, and we should all have a life. Even those of us who are like, you know, I don't have children, so I don't have that excuse. I'm like, I have to stop working so I can attend to my family. I don't have a family, but I have other priorities and I have other obligations. And that shouldn't be a reason that the only reason that you get to stop working at the end of the day.
And people with families should be able to stop working at the end of the day too, and have at least some moments for breaks. Yeah,
exactly.
Totally.
We should all be able to do that. And I think that our organizations and nonprofits have really really pushed to the edge of just like saying, you know, do it all. And I don't think that's sustainable.
You know, Greg Schremp once said in his day, you couldn't be taken seriously if you had a hobby or watched television. And nowadays they don't take you seriously unless you watch television and have a hobby.
Yeah, it's true.
I've probably said too much here. I'm like in the tunnel of the whatever Discord room we're in, and I'm like
Discord sounds like nobody's like a haunted carnival attraction.
I know. I'm like, nobody's listening to me. I can just say what I really think, and now I've probably incriminated myself.
No, chat is actually giving you great feedback. Chat.
I was gonna say people are like totally into it. People are echoing that for fields that are seemingly different, like hairstylists are the same way. People are loving the Oregon Trail reference. Death Lorist is shouting in all caps, like, "No, you have not. You are correct." Like, and I think that we at Folkwise would say the same thing too. And I think that that's just a shift in both generation and work style, and not everyone's gonna get it, but I think that we're doing better at prioritizing ourselves and our rest so we can do better work for longer.
I think
in some ways, but
yeah.
Well, Maria, do you want to lightning round some fun questions?
Wait, should I
Yeah.
ask
What else?
Joel's?
What else you got for me?
Well, I'll get to those
That's
chat questions at the
Joel.
end, Daisy. I got those. First
Okay,
off,
okay. We got a couple for you at the end.
First off, Maria, do you have a favorite hat, and how do you pick your favorite hats?
My gosh, I have. That's so hard. Okay, do you want me to show you my favorite hat?
You have
I
have one
mean,
favorite
I'm not
hat?
gonna say no.
I'm not gonna say no.
Like,
Chat, you're killing it. You're
love
killing it,
this.
by the way, chat. I
Yes.
love the chat questions. Also love when
Yeah.
Death Loris posts a lonk and everyone dog piles on her. It's hysterical. All right, we got a hat.
Okay, yeah,
Cool
I'll have
hat?
That's so funny.
Okay, this is kind of inaccurate with the like head thing here, but
Oh,
Sure,
okay.
I know that
of
feeling.
course.
This hat changed my life.
Yes.
I know.
What?
Oh.
Oh,
That's good. That's good.
That's
Off
great.
the asymmetrical placement with the ribbon in the back is so Beatrix Potter.
So I found that hat. I bought. So I'm addicted to hats. A, and B. I found this woman who makes hats at the Ithaca Farmers Market.
Ooh.
And I walked into the farmers market one day last summer, and I had no intention of buying a hat. I was like not even thinking about it. But I
Yeah.
saw this hat, and I was like, I don't care how much that hat costs. I must have that hat. Like that hat was made for me.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
bought the hat, and it was not cheap. Like, I mean, this woman is an artist, and she deserves every penny. And
yes.
I limit myself now to 2 hats. I buy 2 hats from her a year. I buy a spring, summer one, and I buy a winter, fall one.
Oh,
Awesome.
And that's my.
you got a
And now,
metric.
well, it's just my budget, you know.
True.
I'm like, this is a
Necessity is the
reasonable.
mother of invention, am I right?
But yeah, I don't know. I've always really liked hats, and I do have certain like styles that I like more than others. And this is called a bergère.
Ooh.
It's so it's like if you were looking at an 18th century painting of like, you know, people out, you know,
yes.
you know, Marie Antoinette, you know, frolicking with like sheep and stuff. This is that kind of hat.
Nice.
Love it. Chat says, ready to judge the county fair apple pie contest in that hat. Hell yeah.
Next one, Maria, what's cider purity?
Oh, that's from my like Instagram bio.
I think it is.
I think
it is. Cider purist is in my. So mostly it rhymed with 2 other things. Hat evangelist and folklorist. And so I was like cider purist.
Cider purist.
Yeah, okay.
But it also, I mean, I just, you know, I do personally, although I try to be like, you know, ecumenical about my cider drinking and I want to support everybody, I do just like, you know, cider that's not adulterated with other frou-frou stuff. It's like just apples.
Yeah.
Like just
give me just apples.
You were talking about the hops earlier. Yeah.
I don't want
just
a pineapple. Apples. I don't want a hop.
I don't want a pear or a hop.
I don't want a pear. Maybe a pear.
I mean, a pear is a whole other thing. And actually,
yeah.
I do like hop cider. It's more sort of like if it goes into the alco pop like direction where you're like, is this Mike's Hard Lemonade? No, not so much.
Thanks.
I mean, if it's like cider made with like blueberry juice from the same farm, that's I can dig that. Yeah.
Love it.
Maria, do you have any quick tips for car camping?
Ooh. So, here's what I'll say about camping. Well, I kind of over this past 6 months, when I say I lived out of my car, I didn't actually live out of my car, but I had all of my stuff could go from place to place because I was like doing the field work thing. Yeah, you gotta pack. You gotta have a plan, man. You gotta have like a Tetris situation where you're like, this is the bin that my fieldwork equipment goes in, and this is like the cooler, and this is the suitcase, and this is the tent, and it all fits together just like this. Yeah, that's very satisfying. I like spatial things fitting together. But also tent-wise, so here's the thing. Here's my confession.
Yeah.
I don't actually like camping because
Oh.
I don't like sleeping on the ground in a damp nylon bag, aka a tent.
You make it sound so appealing. What do you mean?
So during the pandemic, I got my stimulus check, and I was like, all right, I should stimulate the economy. What am I gonna do? And so I was like, I'm gonna buy a tent because I might have to escape to the woods and like the apocalypse might happen.
Yeah, we might have to run away.
And I was like, if I'm gonna get a tent, I'm gonna get essentially what is a collapsible cabin. And so
Go big or go home.
I want to be able to stand up in it. I want it to be like not damp in the morning when I arise from my slumber. I researched the hell out of a canvas tent.
Yes.
And I bought myself this like tall canvas tent. And it is like a little castle in the woods. It is heavy as shit though. It's probably like 50 pounds.
Oh shit.
So it's not not for like backpacking, but if you're car camping and you don't mind, like you can't, this is not a one night only kind of tent. This is like, I'm going to be here for a week.
Yeah.
So I've got that worked out. I'm like, that's the kind of camping that I do, which is analogous more to British like camping where they have their little caravan or like, what we would call an Airstream, and and people in Britain, so the farm I worked at, they had camping in the orchard and all these like British people would show up in their little caravans and they'd have little bunting that they like decorate the space.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is my kind of camping. This is essentially like we're having a little garden party outside.
Yes. That's awesome.
Do you listen to Maria, do you listen to Casey Musgraves? The country singer?
No, but
She's got
I
a song
probably
called
heard
My
of her.
House, which is about like living in an Airstream, which is water and electric, place to drain your septic. Any KOA is A-okay as long as I'm with you. That's what this sounds like to me.
Yes.
Pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good. I'm gonna get your game ready real quick, but Daisy, we got some chat questions. Can you read the first one from Jaded December?
Yeah, I got 2 chat questions for you. The first one was best apple versus worst apple. Do you have an opinion?
My favorite apple is the Ashmead's kernel.
Oh my god.
Oh.
That sounds like a D&D monster.
Explain.
So the Ashmead's kernel is like a russet apple. It's got kind of a nutty flavor and it's got this very firm texture and it's ready later in the season. So it's kind of like your late October, November apple. And it's just a lot more, it's got a lot of personality. It's like it's the kind of apple that would, camp out in an Airstream, right?
Nice.
Worst, everybody likes to hate on Red Delicious, right? And they're not wrong.
Okay, great.
Okay, yeah, it's there for me too.
And the other
Joel
Chappening,
yeah. The other question from Joel Chappening is saw a great talk by Angus at AFS Harrisburg. He talked about the importance of beer sales to the financial stability of the festival. He wants to know if you are potentially going to change the beer to cider. In relation to the folk festival.
I have to rain on your parade because we don't sell beer at the festival at all. Rutgers is technically a dry campus. When Angus started the festival, that was not the case, and he did sell beer, and it was an economic engine for the festival.
Oh damn.
And
but no more.
It's not my favorite story about the festival. I think that there are more compelling origin stories for why the festival is successful as it is.
Yes.
So I sort of cringe a little bit every time he tells it, but
good to know.
So all that is to say, and actually I have no problem not selling alcohol because that is just one more administrative infrastructure
More
issue.
paperwork. Oh, God.
Taxes,
I don't want to deal
paperwork,
with.
Yeah, the taxes, totally.
So
Makes
sorry. No,
Sorry, Joel.
there's no beer and there is no cider, but we have a rockin' good time anyway.
Hell
I
yeah.
feel like I'm like your Sunday
Yeah, I'm sure
school,
you do.
Teacher.
No, I bet it's.
We're gonna have a great time without any alcohol at all.
Joel said, "Oh no, I will not spread the origin story anymore." He was so animated.
I know,
Yeah,
and that's okay.
good storyteller. Yeah,
But thank you, chat,
Thank you.
including Joel. But thank you, chat, for sending in those questions for Maria. And Maria, before you go, we have one last thing to do with you. So if you haven't hit view
Watch
stream or watch stream in Discord,
Oh,
could
I
you do
haven't.
that? Because we have one
Good.
last thing we want to do with you. And we
This
want to
or
play
that.
We want to play a quick game of this or
Yes.
that, and these are all going to be Apple related, this or that. And you just pick your favorite of the two options. We have this whole slideshow laid out for you. You ready?
Whoa.
All
Okay.
right, so
I'm
first
ready.
off, apple
good.
pie or apple cobbler?
Oh, so hard. Cobbler.
Cobbler. All right, you heard it here first.
Yes.
Number
Yes.
2, Macintosh apple or the Apple Macintosh?
Macintosh apple.
Macintosh
100%.
apple. All right. Stick to your guns.
Of course, let's go.
Number 3, Pink Ladies, the apple or the Pink Ladies from Greece?
Okay, I have to go with Pink Ladies from Greece.
Oh, nice.
No, okay,
Nice,
that's
nice,
good.
nice.
Yes. Okay.
Number 4, Pippin apples or Pippin took?
Oh my gosh. That's hard too, man. I mean, how can we say no to Pippin too? Like he's living the life. He's going
really
on the he's on the journey. Like
on the
so
journey,
Pippin
singing
too.
songs, smoking the leaf.
Yeah.
Having second breakfast. He's doing his thing.
People in the chat are popping up. Okay, next.
Next, number 5, Empire, the apples or Empire, the television show on Fox?
Oh man, I have to admit I've never actually watched Empire, the television show, so I'm just gonna have to go with Empire the Apple.
You picked the apple. All right. Number 6, we've got Fuji apples or Mount Fuji.
Ooh, yeah, I go with Mount Fuji for that one.
Mount Fuji. Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
Beautiful
it's all about we just keep coming back to the journey, right? We got to go up the mountain.
That's so
It's
true.
apples or journeys. Apples or journeys. Number 7, you've got Applejack Brandy or Applejack the Little Pony.
Okay, I have to go with Applejack Brandy, and I have some on my shelf back there.
Oh,
so
I see it. Is that what that bottle is? Nice.
Sorry, all bronies and Pegasisters who may be watching. She picked the brandy.
I mean, Applejack, founded in New Jersey, oldest alcohol of the nation.
Oh, let's go. I didn't realize that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, number 8, we've got Fiona Apple or Fiona the Hippo, pictured with an apple.
With an apple.
Okay, I have to go with Fiona Apple.
Oh,
I mean, songstress of my, my generational sort of kind of Gen Xer.
Fiona Apple is so good.
I'm gonna switch our hats to a Cincinnati Reds hat just for this. Someone's gotta respect the Cincinnati Zoo. All right.
Mirany's not says this is the hardest and most impossible one for them.
Number 9 is Apple Martin Paltrow or a Gala Apple. I assume you might see Apple Martin Paltrow at a gala.
Yeah, I was gonna say, what's the connection with that one? Oh, okay, thanks for explaining.
Yeah, I think Apple. She's an apple. Her parents are celebrities.
I'm gonna go with a Gala apple here. I mean, it's not gonna do you wrong. Like a Gala apple is dependable. I don't know about Apple Martin Paltrow.
I don't know about Apple Martin. I mean, who knows? I know she every now and then on social media makes fun of her mom, which is fine. And who's this influencer? That's chat. That's Chris Martin and Gwyneth Paltrow's kid. And 10, Red Delicious apple or a stack of cardboard.
You know, cardboard is really useful.
Oh, there it is.
I'd probably take the cardboard.
Damn, that shit corrugated?
It is corrugated. Good eye, Daisy.
Damn.
All right, we've reached the end of your interview. Chat, you know what to do. Roll out the ladders for Maria as a way to say thank you. If you don't got the ladders, you give her a hearty GG's, a hearty handshake, and a good game. But Maria, if people want to hear more about apples and hats from you, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Cider with Maria.
That's right.
And I also have a website, ciderwithmaria.com. It's all very integrated and brand savvy. Yeah. Cider with Maria.
Let's go.
Shoot, I'm dropping those links right now.
Hell yeah.
You can also, if you're into the New Jersey Folk Festival, you can visit njfolkfest.org.
And when is the NJ
come
Folk
visit
Fest?
us. It is on April 29th,
April
2023. It is the last Saturday in April every year.
Oh, wow. Florida's the last Saturday in May. Look at this.
Wow.
Wow.
Nice.
All right. Thank you so much to Maria for coming on the show.
Thanks, guys. I hope I didn't
awesome.
reveal too much, but I have revealed just enough to be.
You revealed a lot about Red Delicious apples.
A lot about for some reason I need to know about I need to know what lobbyist farmer whoever is just so intent on making Red Delicious publicly available at every hotel lobby that they somehow have not gone extinct. Like, why are they still here? There is something happening here. I feel like I'm Charlie Kelly Charlie Day
in front of the conspiracy board.
Yeah, for the conspiracy board, just trying to draw connections with the origin of Red Delicious. Pepe Sylvia.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway.
Industrialized food systems, Chad is telling you, Daisy. She mentioned that earlier.
I know. I just the Red Delicious though.